The House of Tortured Souls. In a quiet town nestled between dense woods, there stood an old house that everyone avoided. The legend was that once you entered, you could never leave. But Mark, a skeptic by nature, decided to debunk the myth one stormy night. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, he approached the front door, which creaked open as if expecting him. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of decay. As he stepped in, the door slammed shut behind him, a sound echoing through the empty halls. Mark shrugged it off, convinced it was just the wind. He wandered through the house, noting the odd, ancient portraits on the walls. Each one depicted a person with hollow eyes and an expression of deep sorrow. But the strange thing was, the farther he went, the more the faces in the portraits seemed to change, their sorrow turning to anger, their eyes following him. Suddenly, his flashlight flickered and died, plunging him into darkness. He fumbled for his phone, using its weak light to guide him back into the house. But the house seemed to have changed. The hallways stretched endlessly, the walls closing in. Then he heard it, a whisper, faint at first, but growing louder, as if dozens of voices were speaking at once. "Join us," they said. "Stay with us." Panicking, Mark broke into a run, but no matter how fast he moved, the whispers followed, the faces in the portraits now grinning with malice. Finally, he saw the front door and lunged for it, yanking it open. As he crossed the threshold, he froze. The world outside was gone, replaced by endless rows of portraits, all of them showing his face, hollow-eyed and trapped in eternal terror. And the door closed behind him, sealing him in the house, his screams echoing unheard. The legend was true, after all. The Silver Mirror. Late one evening, Lily found an antique mirror at a flea market. It was tall, with an ornate silver frame, and the glass was so clear it seemed almost alive. The vendor, an old woman with a vacant stare, warned Lily not to buy it, muttering something about the other side. But Lily dismissed the warning, thinking it was just an old superstition, and took the mirror home. That night, she hung the mirror in her bedroom. As she stood before it, something strange happened. Her reflection didn't match her movements perfectly. When she raised her hand, her reflection was a second or two slow. When she smiled, the reflection's grin was a bit too wide, too strained. Unease crept into her, but she brushed it off as her imagination. In the middle of the night, Lily awoke to the sound of soft tapping. At first she thought it was a tree branch against the window, but the noise was coming from the mirror. She glanced over and froze. Her reflection was standing there, tapping on the glass from the inside, staring at her with eyes full of desperation. Lily bolted upright in bed, her heart racing. The reflection mimicked her, but its expression was twisted with fear. Slowly, it pressed its hand against the glass, and Lily could see the reflection's hand was bruised and battered, as if it had been pounding on the glass for hours. Terrified, Lily reached for her phone to call someone, anyone. But when she looked back at the mirror, her reflection was gone. In its place was an empty room. Her room. Only it looked darker, more decayed. The bed was unmade, and the walls were covered in strange dark stains. She turned around, trying to see if it was real, but everything was normal behind her. Then the room in the mirror changed again. A figure appeared in the reflection, standing in the doorway. It was her, but different. The other Lily was pale, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. She began walking toward the mirror, her movements deliberate, her gaze locked on the real Lily. Panicking, Lily tried to turn away, but she was frozen in place, her eyes glued to the mirror as if the other Lily grew closer. The reflection pressed its face against the glass, grinning wider than should have been possible, its eyes full of malice. Then, with a sudden crack, the glass shattered, and the room plunged into darkness. When Lily awoke, she was no longer in her bedroom, but inside the reflection. She could see her old room through the shards of the broken mirror on the floor, but now it was she who was trapped on the other side. And standing in the room was the other Lily, now fully in her place, staring at the shattered mirror with a smile of satisfaction. City in the Jar. The night was dark, and the only light that penetrated the dense forest came from a mysterious green glow in the distance. Nathan had been drawn to it, unable to resist the strange pull that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within the woods. As he pushed past thick, damp underbrush, the glow became more intense, casting eerie shadows on the towering trees behind him. Finally, he stumbled into a small clearing, and there it was, a massive glass jar, placed delicately on a stone pedestal. The jar stood about 4 feet tall and was filled with an entire miniature city, glowing faintly in shades of green and purple. Tiny skyscrapers reached toward the lid, their windows illuminated by an otherworldly light, while small, intricate trees lined the streets, their leaves shimmering softly in the artificial light. The city was perfect, too perfect. It had been frozen in time. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. The longer he stared, the more he realized that the city wasn't just a model. It was alive. He could see minuscule figures moving within the streets, walking unhurriedly as if they were late for some unknown appointment. Cars, no larger than ants, zipped along the roads, their headlights cutting through the darkened corners of the city. Everything was so detailed, so lifelike, that it was impossible to believe that it had all been constructed by hand. A cold shiver ran down Nathan's spine. The city was contained within the jar, yet it was thriving, as if some unseen force was sustaining it. He felt a strange sense of dread. There was something fundamentally wrong about this place, something unnatural. The longer he stared, the more he could feel it, a palpable malevolence that seemed to radiate from the jar. As he stepped closer, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The forest surrounding the jar wasn't just any forest. The trees inside the jar were identical to the ones that surrounded him in the clearing. It was as if the jar had captured a tiny replica of the very world he stood in, down to the smallest detail. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the implications. He looked around, and then back at the jar. What if the jar didn't just contain a miniature city, but an entire world? What if it was not just a model, but a prison? And then a terrifying thought crossed his mind. What if someone or something was watching him from within the city, just as he was watching them? His breath quickened and he started to back away, but then he noticed something even more disturbing. The jar had been sealed tightly with a metal lid, but now the lid was beginning to turn on its own. Slowly, ever so slowly, the lid twisted, as if something inside was trying to open it. Panic surged through Nathan. He didn't want to find out what would happen if the lid came off, but his feet felt glued to the ground. The green light intensified, almost blinding him as the lid continued to unscrew. The tiny figures in the city had stopped moving, as if they too were aware of what was happening. With a final metallic click, the lid popped off, and the light within the jar pulsed once, twice before it exploded outward, engulfing the clearing in a blinding flash. Nathan screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the light. When the light faded, the clearing was empty. The jar stood on its pedestal, its lid sealed once more. Inside the tiny city hummed with life, glowing softly as before. Everything was calm, peaceful. And on the streets of the city, if one looked closely enough, they might have seen a new figure walking among the tiny buildings. The figure with a face twisted in eternal terror, forever trapped inside the glass jar. Lost episode of The Golden Girls, One Last Night. In the late 80s, there were whispers in the industry of the lost episode of The Golden Girls, an episode so disturbing that it never aired and was pulled from the archives. For years, this episode was considered a mere urban legend among fans, until a grainy VHS tape surfaced at a garage sale in Miami. The label read simply, The Golden Girls, One Last Night. The episode begins like any other. The familiar theme song plays, but there's something off about it. It's slower, and the visuals are in black and white, flickering with occasional static. The camera pans into the living room of the girls' Miami home, but the usual warm tones are replaced with a washed-out, almost sepia filter. Dorothy, Blanche, Rose, and Sophia were all sitting at the kitchen table, but their faces were unusually somber. The laughter track, typically present at the slightest quip, is absent, replaced by an unsettling silence that makes the scene feel oppressive. Blanche begins the conversation, her voice soft and wavering. "I had the strangest dream last night. We all died." The camera lingers on each of their faces as they react. Dorothy's expression is hard to read, a mix of concern and something darker. Rose seems oblivious, but there's a strange hollowness in her eyes. Sophia, normally full of sass, just stares blankly ahead, her lips pressed into a thin line. As the episode progresses, it becomes clear that something is horribly wrong. The women start to recall memories that never happened in the series, memories of pain, regret, and loss. Blanche talks about a child she never had, describing the loss in vivid, gut-wrenching detail. Rose recounts a horrifying incident in St. Olaf involving a fire that took the lives of her entire family, a tragedy never mentioned in any other episode. Dorothy's voice trembled as she speaks of the last conversation she had with her ex-husband, Stan. He told me I was the biggest mistake of his life. Tears fill her eyes, but they don't fall. "I never told anyone that," she whispers. Sophia remains silent throughout most of the episode, only speaking at the very end. The tension builds as the women start to hear strange noises in the house. Whispers, footsteps, doors creaking open on their own. The camera angles become more erratic, the lighting dimmer, casting long, unnatural shadows across their faces. Finally, Sophia looks up from the table, her eyes wide with a clarity that is almost terrifying. "We're not supposed to be here," she says, her voice echoing unnaturally. The other women turn to her, confusion and fear on their faces. "We died last night," Sophia continues, her tone final. This is hell." The camera zooms in on Dorothy's face as the realization hits her. She opens her mouth to speak, but no sound comes out. The lights flicker, and when they come back on, the room is empty, except for the 4 chairs still arranged around the table, now draped with cobwebs. The episode ends abruptly, cutting to static. There's no credits, no music, just the cold, harsh hiss of the tape running out. Reports from those who have watched the tape claim that strange things happen afterwards. Flickering lights, the sensation of being watched, and in one instance, a viewer swore she heard Blanche's voice whisper, "Thank you for being a friend," from behind her. The tape has since disappeared, lost to time, but the memory of that unsettling episode lingers in the minds of those who dare to seek it out. They say the Golden Girls found themselves in their final episode, not in the comfort of their Miami home, but trapped in an endless night, together forever in the dark. Alright guys, that was some creepy stories. I love that Golden Girls one. I love the Golden Girls so much. I thought I would write a story about that. A little bit creepy. To me, it seems a bit more like a Halloween special type of episode. Well, thanks for watching. Don't forget to visit my Redbubble shop at redbubble.com/pixielove1223. Please like and subscribe if you like the video. I will see you next time. Bye.